A dangerous game of tit for tat is being played in Ukraine. Drone warfare has engulfed the country. Whenever Ukraine comes up with a new drone tactic, Russia responds with one of its own. Ukraine then responds again, and so it goes, with each country trying to one-up the other. But Ukraine just won the game. How? It's developed a new type of drone that allows it to strike the very people who are controlling Russia's unmanned aerial vehicles. And that drone has already successfully struck a major target. Ukraine hunted down an elite Russian unit, and what happened next was absolutely brutal. That unit was one of the most feared that Russia has at its disposal, Rubicon. Also known as the Center for Advanced Unmanned Technologies, Rubicon was formed in August 2024, and it specializes in the kind of drone warfare that Ukraine has used to great effect against Russia's forces. In essence, the unit was Russia's answer to Ukraine's drones, and it's been remarkably effective in the short time that it's existed. Several outlets have claimed as much, including Forbes. On September 3rd, Forbes journalist David Kirichenko said that Rubicon has emerged as one of Russia's most effective forces on the front, with its expansion of the Russian killing zone making it a nightmare for Ukraine to deal with. Thanks to Rubicon, Ukraine's logistics are often disrupted, as the unit's drones make it difficult to approach Russian forces on the front lines. Rubicon's operators work behind the front lines. Ukraine needed a weapon to strike them, but its usual drones weren't up for the job. Kirichenko says that Rubicon is the unit primarily responsible for Ukraine suffering from a shortage of trucks, armored transports, and similar vehicles. Many of those vehicles get destroyed by Rubicon's drones when they're on supply runs, meaning Russia has finally started using a tactic that has served Ukraine very well for years. Rubicon is also growing, as revealed by the head of Ukraine's Victory Drones project, Maria Belinska. She took to Telegram to explain, "From a unit of a few hundred people, they are growing into thousands in order to cover the entire front. By autumn, we will see at least 5,000 to 6,000 specialists in well-coordinated, equipped crews. Everyone who knows Rubicon agrees on one thing: it's very effective. We're in autumn now, so Rubicon has thousands of drone operators working from inside Ukraine." Radio Free Europe Radio Liberty, or RFE-RL, has also covered Russia's elite drone unit, noting that it is as secretive as it is effective and methodical. It notes that one of Rubicon's first tasks after its formation was to provide drone support in Kursk following Ukraine's counter-invasion into that Russian oblast in August 2024. It took a while, but the combination of Rubicon and tens of thousands of troops managed to push Russia out of Kursk in March. They were a key reason why Russia was able to take back essentially all of Kursk Oblast in February and March, foreign policy research military analyst Rob Lee told RFE-RL in September. Belinska also told the outlet that Rubicon has emerged as one of Russia's best technological units, and Putin has been pumping money into the unit to make it as large and as strong as possible. We tell you all of this to impress a point upon you. Rubicon is dangerous. So dangerous that Ukraine cannot allow the unit to continue operating as it has been for the past year or so. Rubicon's ability to create kill zones and disrupt logistics from behind the front lines has hampered Ukraine's ability to defend against Russian assaults or conduct counter-assaults of its own. It's no use trying to take out the first-person view or FPV drones that Rubicon operates. The drones are cheap, and there will always be more to replace any that are destroyed. What Ukraine needed to do was hunt down the Rubicon operators themselves. If you take out the operators, the drones can't fly. And that's exactly what Ukraine did in early November. On November 4th, the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, or HUR, took to Telegram to announce that they had conducted a powerful strike against a Rubicon headquarters located in a city that will be familiar to many, Avdiivka. In a half-destroyed building in the occupied Avdiivka, Donetsk region, HUR fighters of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine discovered the headquarters of Russian invaders from the so-called Rubicon Center. HUR explained in its social media post. The enemy unit Rubicon specializes in the use of unmanned systems, including combat ones during Russia's genocidal war against Ukraine. It's one of the most combat-ready structures of the Russian occupation army, on which the aggressor state spends significant resources, HUR added. With a suitable target located, there was only one thing left for Ukraine to do: strike, and it did so in absolutely brutal fashion. Much as it had done many times before in its war against Russia, Ukraine unleashed a horde of drones on the Rubicon command post that it discovered in Avdiivka. According to the Kyiv Post, those drones scored direct hits as part of a precision strike, partially destroying the building that Rubicon's operators have been using to defend Russia's position in Avdiivka and support other troops operating in Donetsk. Beyond destroying the building, Ukraine also managed to take out several Russian officers and soldiers. That's according to UKR Inform, which can't offer many more details. Ukraine hasn't announced a specific kill count for its drone assault on the Rubicon facility, though it's likely that taking out even a handful of officers alone will be enough to weaken Rubicon's operations in the key Donetsk region. But hold on a second, earlier we told you that Ukraine's normal drones aren't up for the job of taking out Rubicon's facilities or operators. At least that's the case for Ukraine's FPV drones. Designed primarily to assault Russian forces and equipment on the front lines, FPV drones don't have the range needed to penetrate much deeper than those combat lines. Even the very best of them can only travel up to 20 kilometers or a little over 12 miles, as the new Voice of Ukraine revealed in April. Rubicon's drone operators are smart enough to set up their headquarters beyond the reach of those types of drones. And though Ukraine has plenty of long-range drones it could use to strike against such facilities that are behind the front lines, it wants to reserve those drones for doing as much damage as possible on Russian territory. So neither FPV nor long-range drones were options for Ukraine on November 4th. Luckily, Ukraine didn't need either. The strike against the Avdiivka Rubicon facility was conducted by a new type of Ukrainian drone, as HUR explains in its Telegram post. Using the obtained coordinates of the enemy's location, HUR specialists skillfully directed the FP2 unmanned vehicle equipped with a 105-kilogram warhead at the Russian forces in the dense urban areas, HUR declares. FP2 is the main takeaway from that quote. And this terrifying drone has given Ukraine capabilities beyond anything that even Rubicon ever expected it to have. The FP2 drone is made by Firepoint, which you may recognize as the Ukrainian company behind the development of the lethal Flamingo missiles that Ukraine is now using to target Russia. The drone follows on from the company's FP1, though it isn't necessarily a direct upgrade. Rather, Firepoint has designed the FP2 to offer an alternative to the FP1 that is capable of hitting Russian targets at medium range. Targets like the Rubicon facility that Ukraine discovered in early November. In a Medium post where he examines what the FP2 brings to the table, Ryder Blackthorn offers some of the drone's impressive specifications. He repeats HUR's claims that the new drone can carry a 105-kilogram warhead, which equates to about 230 pounds. That's far heavier than the warhead an FPV drone can carry, making the FP2 capable of destroying buildings and entire troop deployments. The FP2 also has an impressive 200-kilometer or 124-mile range. While that may make it suitable for launching strikes against targets in some of Russia's border regions, it's this range that makes the FP2 so effective for attacks against facilities like the Rubicon headquarters. This is a mid-range drone. It flies further than an FPV drone, though not as far as Ukraine's long-range drones. That makes it perfect for tackling targets in occupied Ukraine. Rubicon would have thought that it was relatively safe from Ukraine's drones as long as it was far enough behind the front lines. HUR just proved that isn't the case, as FP2 has emerged as a brand new threat for the Russian deep rear. FP2 is also a drone that comes with a low price tag of just $55,000 per unit, according to Euromaidan Press. That's far lower than the cruise missiles Ukraine might otherwise have used to take out the Rubicon headquarters, and it means Ukraine gets a massive return on its investment when it scores a hit. Partially destroying a building on November 4th means that Ukraine's FP2 has already repaid its manufacturing cost. Killing several Russian officers and drone operators is just the cherry on top. Rubicon will be especially devastated by HUR's most recent strike for an interesting reason. Ukraine has hit a Rubicon base with an FP2 before, which shows us that Rubicon doesn't have an answer to Ukraine's new mid-range drone. The strike was reported by the Special Care San CatX account, which shared a video of a strike that it said had seen Ukraine hit a Rubicon drone operating unit around 20 kilometers or about 12.4 miles behind the front lines, and it used an FPV drone to do it. The 45 seconds of footage makes for very interesting viewing as we get to see what an FP2 looks like as it takes off. The drone, which looks like a small plane, roars into action and soars into the night sky, quickly disappearing into the inky blackness. At around the 10-second mark, the view changes to the one being captured by the drone itself. Yes, like Ukraine's FPV drones, the FP2 is able to provide a real-time feed of whatever is in front of it. That's ideal for when the drone is being operated manually, as it allows Ukraine's drone pilots to ensure the FP2 is on course to hit its target. The black and white footage shows us what the FP2 sees as it's in flight. Within seconds, the drone zones in on a target surrounded by trees. The roof of a building briefly comes into view as the drone descends, and then nothing. The drone's feed cuts out, but we know exactly what happened next. The video's viewpoint then switches to that of a reconnaissance drone flying high above Ukraine's target. It's thanks to this drone that we see the sheer size of the explosion that the FP2 is capable of delivering as the Rubicon facility goes up in flames. And Ukraine wasn't done there. It double taps with its FP2 drones. The video switches to footage filmed by another FP2 as it descends on the same target. We briefly see the Rubicon facility's destroyed roof as the drone descends. only for the viewpoint to switch back to that shot by the reconnaissance drone, which records the explosion. Other strikes follow, with David Axe summing up the footage in his Trench Arc column in September. As a surveillance drone watched from overhead, 4 of the new FP2s slammed into the building reportedly housing the Rubicon operators, Axe wrote. At the price mentioned earlier, that's $220,000 worth of drones committed to a single Rubicon facility. The loss of that headquarters and the operators within it was priceless. Ukraine delivered a message to Rubicon with these September strikes. We have a drone that can hit your operators. Whether Rubicon heeded that warning or not doesn't matter. On November 4th, HUR did it again, and another Rubicon headquarters went up in flames, taking officers and drone operators along with it. And the fact that Ukraine was able to repeat the same trick tells us one of two things. Either Russia doesn't have enough air defenses to protect one of its most valuable units from Ukraine's new drones, or those air defense units aren't capable of detecting and shooting down those drones. Either way, the result is the same for Rubicon. Russia's most advanced technological unit has just fallen far behind Ukraine's innovators. There is one last little twist to this tale, and it's something that we touched upon earlier in the video. We'll let HUR explain what this twist is in its Telegram post. The Defense Intelligence of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine reminds that for every war crime committed against the Ukrainian people, there will be just retribution, HUR said when announcing its November strike. It would have been enough for Ukraine to have taken out the Rubicon headquarters, no matter where it was stationed in occupied Ukraine. But the November strike was made all the sweeter for Ukraine because it delivered something that Ukraine had wanted for well over a year: revenge for Russia's taking of Avdiivka. The Battle of Avdiivka, which raged from October 2023 to February 2024, was brutal for both sides. But for Ukraine, it was a massive shot against its defense of Donetsk, as the small city had become established as one of the country's most important fortresses. The battle still stands as one of the bloodiest and most ferocious of the Ukraine war so far, and Ukraine ultimately came away the loser, though it did plenty of damage to Russia's forces in defeat. Newsweek made that clear in the wake of the battle via a February 2024 report that sifted through the rubble of Russia's losses in the city. It reported that around 17,000 Russian soldiers were killed due to Putin relentlessly throwing them at Ukraine's Avdiivka defenses. Another 30,000 Russian soldiers were wounded, leading to a total casualty count of 47,000 for the 5-month battle. In other words, Russia lost about 10,000 soldiers per month to take a single city away from Ukraine. If Kyiv's figures are accurate, this means more Russian soldiers were killed in and around Avdiivka than during the decade the Soviet Union spent fighting in Afghanistan, Newsweek reported. The Soviet Union sent thousands of its soldiers into Afghanistan at the end of December 1979. The resulting conflict lasted nearly a decade, and estimates widely put the Soviet death toll at around 15,000 troops. The sheer scale of death revealed Putin's tactical ineptitude. However, it also showed Ukraine that Russia and its leader would stoop to unexpected levels of brutality against Ukraine and Russia's own soldiers to get what Putin wants. Ukraine ended up being as damaged as Russia by this terrible battle. The Guardian reported in February 2024 that the fighting had caused almost all of the city's population of more than 30,000 people to pack up and leave. That's assuming that they weren't killed by the Russian shelling, bombing, and assaults before they had a chance to make their way out. Russia didn't limit the killing to Ukraine's soldiers, as civilians were just as likely to get caught in the firing lines. By December 2023, which was around halfway through the battle for Avdiivka, the city's military mayor provided the numbers. Vitaly Barabash reported that 154 Ukrainian civilians had been killed by Russia in the gruesome battle, and that only 1,200 or so remained in Avdiivka by December. The city itself ended up almost completely destroyed. As for Ukraine's military losses, they were lower than Russia's, though no less devastating. Ukraine has never revealed the true scale of its losses in the city, though they are presumed to be heavy. That's according to the Washington Post, which reported in February 2024 that Ukraine likely failed to safely evacuate its troops from Avdiivka before the Russian forces broke into the city. That shouldn't be a surprise. The withdrawal was reportedly chaotic, which contradicts Ukraine's claims that the evacuation was orderly. Plus, Russia outnumbered Ukraine 7 soldiers to 1 and was launching up to 60 of its powerful glide bombs at Avdiivka per day during the battle. It's likely that thousands of Ukraine's troops died in the fighting. Avdiivka remains one of the country's biggest defeats in its nearly 4-year-long war with Russia. All of that brings us back to early November and what HUR pulled off against the Rubicon unit operating in Avdiivka. This wasn't just about taking out a dangerous drone unit, though that is obviously important. Ukraine's FP2 strike allowed it to extract a small measure of revenge against Russia for the atrocities it committed during the fight for Avdiivka. Now, with the FP2 at its disposal, Ukraine can launch more pinpoint strikes against Russian positions that it hasn't been able to reach on foot or with its other weapons. The Battle of Avdiivka has been reignited, though it's going to take a very different form from the battle we saw at the end of 2023 and beginning of 2024. In the FP2, Ukraine has a potential game-changer on its hands. That doesn't mean the FP2 is capable of single-handedly winning the war for Ukraine. No single weapon offers that type of silver bullet outside of nuclear missiles that Ukraine doesn't have. However, the FP2 fills a gap for Ukraine. The drone provides the country with a cost-effective mid-range weapon that can take out guarded targets and hit deeper into occupied Ukraine than an FPV drone could ever hope to hit. FP2 likely won't be used to destroy Russia's frontline assaults. Instead, it will make those assaults weaker. It will take out storage facilities, command posts, logistical infrastructure, and as we saw in September and November, the Rubicon drone headquarters to make those frontline assaults weaker than ever before. Russia should be very worried about that. HUR just proved how impressive FP2 is with its strike on the Rubicon headquarters, and it's safe to assume that we're going to see a lot more strikes like this as FP2 enters mass production. Poland isn't playing around. It knows it may very well be the next name on Vladimir Putin's hit list, and it wants to be ready to defend itself if and when the need arises. So it's leaving nothing to chance, accelerating ahead of neighboring nations and leaving the European Union stunned with its proactive plan to stop Russia as early as 2026, an innovative anti-drone system that could render the Kremlin's Shahid swarms absolutely worthless. It's hardly surprising that Poland is eager to level up its defenses. While there's no clear evidence to suggest that Russia plans to invade Poland anytime soon, numerous analysts and experts across the globe have long harbored fears that Putin's plans to expand his sphere of influence extend far beyond Ukraine. There have been rumors and reports that the Russian leader eventually intends an attack on one or more NATO nations, which might include any of the 3 Baltic states as well as Poland itself. Invading any of those countries would be highly irrational, given that they're all part of the powerful NATO alliance and enjoy the protection of the world's largest and most powerful military force, the United States of America, along with several other major military powers like France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. However, Russia has proven that it doesn't always behave rationally, and Putin may see Poland as the next logical step in his long-term plan for European conquest. Like Lithuania, Poland sits in a strategic location with a long stretch of Baltic Sea coastline, a border with Belarus, one of Russia's closest allies, and also a stretch of border with the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad. Moscow might want to effectively bridge the gap between that exclave and the rest of Russia, taking control of the famous Suwalki Gap that sits between Belarus and Kaliningrad along the Poland-Lithuania border. It could also use the exclave to its advantage, launching attacks on Polish territory from Belarus to the east and Kaliningrad to the north, forcing Warsaw to divide its forces or risk complete capitulation at one front or the other. Russia may also have other plans in mind for Poland. Putin may be attracted to the idea of capturing parts of Poland to form some sort of buffer or security zone, separating Russia's regions from the major NATO nations of Western Europe, for example. Or he might intend to cut off Polish supply lines to Ukraine and the Baltic nations, making them easier targets to take over. Given his erratic decision-making and volatile personality, we can never truly know what's going through the Russian leader's mind. But Poland knows that it sits in a precarious position, and it needs to be ready to face up to the very real threat of a possible Russian invasion at some stage in the next few years. That's one of the reasons it's been doing so much to strengthen its defenses in recent times, leading the way in defense spending across Europe and even among all NATO nations, committing close to 5% of its GDP to military investment. Poland has also sought to upgrade its assets across the board, investing in world-class tanks, fighter jets, artillery systems, air defenses, and other military hardware to ensure that despite being a significantly smaller nation, it's still able to go toe-to-toe with Russia should the need arise. It's also launched the exciting East Shield initiative, elevating the physical barriers and electronic warfare defenses along its eastern border with Belarus in order to make any invasion attempt an almost impossible challenge. Now it's going one step further. It intends to start work on a national anti-drone system within a matter of months, leveling up its defenses against the types of drones that Russia uses on a near-nightly basis to bombard towns and cities far and wide across Ukraine. It's worth noting that the European Union already unveiled plans to build a so-called drone wall to safeguard the continent's skies back in mid-October. Officially entitled the European Drone Defensive Initiative, the wall is just one part of Europe's 5-year defense roadmap. It's set to include a continent-wide network of sensors, jamming systems, and anti-drone weaponry that can detect and neutralize hostile drones before they even enter EU airspace. Announcing the plan, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen stated, "There is no time to waste. We must heed the call of our Baltic friends and build a drone wall. This is not an abstract ambition. It's the bedrock of credible defense, a European capability developed together, deployed together, and sustained together that can respond in real time. One that leaves no ambiguity as to our intentions. Europe will defend every inch of its territory." Work on this project is set to start as soon as the first quarter of 2026, with plans to be fully functional by the end of 2027 and a firm deadline for completion by the end of 2028. Its announcement came in the wake of multiple Russian incursions into EU airspace, with drones and even fighter jets crossing over the borders of several member nations, including Poland, Estonia, and Romania, among others. Poland and the Baltic nations have expressed strong support for the plan, while other countries have taken more pessimistic, critical tones. French President Emmanuel Macron, for instance, claimed that the project was not totally feasible, given the enormous length of Europe's eastern border, which extends for over 1,800 miles or 3,000 kilometers in total. Germany's Defense Minister Boris Pistorius also criticized the plan's presumed effectiveness, arguing that the EU had more pressing needs to focus on. Drone defense, of course, but not by a drone wall. Perhaps Poland has been paying attention to those criticisms, or maybe it has its own secret reservations about the initiative. Either way, it could have chosen to wait and see how well the wall worked once work began in early 2026. Instead, it's opted for a completely different approach, taking matters into its own hands by unveiling its very own anti-drone initiative. The country's Deputy Defense Minister Cezary Tomczyk was the one to reveal Poland's bold plans in a recent interview with Bloomberg News. Commenting on the EU's drone wall, Tomczyk said, "We agree with the idea of strengthening the defense of the skies over the entire European Union and are ready to consider external proposals or solutions, but we give priority to national projects." Tomczyk went on to reveal that the Defense Ministry would soon announce investments in technologies to detect, jam, and neutralize hostile drones. He didn't go into details about which technologies in particular Poland will be working on or how much the government's investments will be worth, but he hoped to see Polish companies secure at least half of the contracts involved, and noted that these new drone defenses will be part of a broader air defense program to protect Poland's skies, infrastructure, and population from enemy invaders. He went on to note that the EU drone wall could perhaps serve as a complement to Poland's new system, stating, "If there are any external tools, we will use them to the fullest." As far as funding goes, Tomczyk noted that the Polish government plans to use the European Union's new SAFE defense loan program to finance its brand new drone shield. Again, he declined to provide further details regarding specific amounts, but the SAFE program, which stands for Security Action for Europe, was officially adopted by the Council of the European Union on May 27, 2025. And can provide up to 150 billion euros in competitively priced, long-maturity loans to member states that request them. The loans are aimed at financing urgent and large-scale procurement projects that are deemed critical for the continent's security, and given that Poland sits effectively at the front lines of Europe, sharing borders with Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine, it is entitled to the largest amount of the 150 billion total. Its allocation is just under 44 billion euros to be precise. That's significantly more than any other nation. The Baltic nations, for example, have been allocated between 2.6 and 6.3 billion euros, while Romania's allocation is over 16.6 billion euros. Evidently, Poland intends to use that money to maximum effect, doing everything it can to make its borders impenetrable and its airspace as secure as possible. In addition, Warsaw does not want to waste any time whatsoever when it comes to developing and deploying its new drone defenses. According to Tomczyk, the government hopes to have the system's initial capabilities up and running within 3 months of these announcements. The full anti-drone system, meanwhile, should be completed within just 2 years. So, as long as Poland sticks to its schedule, it should have at least partial defenses operational by the start of 2026, with additional systems in place as the year progresses and into 2027. Since the Deputy Minister has been somewhat secretive for the time being, we don't know much about the new system. However, Tomczyk did hint that it will be a multi-layered defense network consisting of various tools to first detect and identify drones, then eliminate them. A counter-drone weapon must be comprehensive. It should consist of various sensors and effectors operating simultaneously, first detecting and identifying objects and then neutralizing them. He went on to confirm that Poland's new anti-drone initiative would be another layer in the country's rapidly evolving and increasingly complex air defense network, which already includes long and medium-range systems to strike back at any incoming helicopters, drones, jets, and even cruise missiles. What's more, Poland isn't just upping the game when it comes to defending against drones, it's also investing in building a drone army of its own that it can use for counter-operations against any invading forces. Back in July, the Polish Defense Ministry announced that it would be spending 200 million zloty, $54.2 million, by the end of 2025 on combat and training grounds. As Tomczyk notes, the way in which both Russians and Ukrainians are using unmanned weapon systems today shows that strengthening our capabilities in this area must be a priority in all spheres of activity, in the air, on land, and at sea. Clearly, Poland has no plans to stand still, watch what happens and hope the situation in Europe somehow improves. It's preparing for the worst-case scenario, and it's right to do so. Russia's aggression shows no signs of easing up as the country continues to hammer Ukraine daily with drones, missiles, and assault squads. While a direct attack on a NATO nation would be a major escalation, it's certainly not beyond the realms of credibility, and the Kremlin has been poking and prodding at Europe's eastern border for quite some time now. The drone incursion into Poland back in September was arguably the biggest and most worrying example of this, as approximately 19 to 23 drones traveled all the way across Ukraine and onward into Polish airspace. Poland and several of its NATO allies responded rapidly, scrambling fighter jets to track and shoot down some of the drones, but the response wasn't exactly the most efficient. For starters, only 4 of the drones were taken out with the aid of expensive interceptor missiles. There was also some unnecessary collateral damage as one missile, an AIM-120 AMRAAM that was fired by a Polish F-16 fighter, even ended up missing its target and crash landing on a residential building, destroying the roof of the property but, fortunately, not exploding on impact. The incident exposed clear gaps in Poland's air defenses, but the country and its allies have since taken numerous steps to remedy those issues. Poland has ramped up work on its East Shield National Defense Initiative, for example, which was launched by the country's government back in 2024 in response to rising signs of aggression from Russia and Belarus. By far, one of the biggest and most significant investments in national security and border defense in Poland since the days of the Second World War, the East Shield will have cost around $2.55 billion by the time all necessary work has been completed. It aims to bolster the country's border security through physical barriers and infrastructure construction, as well as anti-tank obstacles, minefields, fences, bunkers, and bridges, as well as electronic warfare and surveillance systems including anti-drone networks, radar stations, and AI-powered early warning systems that will scan the border territories and surrounding landscapes for any signs of an attack or invasion, issuing immediate alerts so that Poland can scramble jets, activate air defenses, and prepare to defend itself. Poland also stands to benefit from NATO's Operation Eastern Sentry, which was launched on September 12th of this year, only 2 days after the Russian drone incursion into Poland. The purpose of this initiative is to increase NATO's defensive capacities in the air, at sea, and on the ground, all along the eastern flank of Europe, ensuring that the country is better prepared to handle any future Russian drone, jet, or missile incursions or attacks from any other hostile nation. Numerous nations from across the alliance pledged assets to the cause, with 2 F-16s and an anti-warfare frigate from Denmark, 3 Rafale fighter jets from France, 4 Eurofighters from Germany, and so on. Nations also agreed to essentially share responsibility for defending the airspace of nations along the eastern border, rather than simply relying on each country to take singular responsibility for its airspace. Announcing this initiative, NATO's Secretary-General Mark Rutte said, "Russia's recklessness in the air along our eastern flank is increasing in frequency. We have seen drones violate our airspace in Romania, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Whether intentional or not, it's dangerous and unacceptable. We are prepared and ready to defend every inch of Allied territory. We stood up Baltic Sentry at the beginning of the year to help safeguard critical infrastructure from reckless behavior in the Baltic Sea. And today, General Grinkovich and I are here to announce that NATO is launching Eastern Sentry to bolster our posture even further along our eastern flank." East Shield and Eastern Sentry combined should make a world of difference to Poland's border, and with the European Drone Defense Initiative also set to roll out in 2026, Moscow will want to think twice about any attempted attack or incursion on Polish soil. But Warsaw's new drone defense network could be the most impressive and important addition to the lot. It's clear that drones are set to dominate warfare for the foreseeable future. That's been proven beyond any shadow of doubt in Ukraine, where the war rapidly transitioned from traditional battle tanks in its early stages to drone swarms and precision strikes as the months and years went by. These days, Russia regularly sends hundreds of drones into Ukraine in the span of a single night, bombarding numerous locations all over the country. It's also built entirely new drone factories and dedicated huge amounts of money and resources in order to churn out thousands of drones every month. The Kremlin is also investing in more advanced drone technology like AI-powered units that can fly autonomously to a pre-programmed destination, without the need for a human pilot to operate them, or other drones that are impervious to existing electronic warfare systems. Kyiv's forces have had to learn to cope with all of that. Through domestic innovation and support from its allies across the globe, Ukraine has developed one of the most sophisticated, layered air defense networks the world has ever seen, reaching a point where it's now able to consistently take out around 80% of the drones sent its way by the Kremlin's forces. Most other countries around the world simply do not have those sorts of defenses, nor do they have the type of first-hand experience that Ukraine has. So if a big Russian drone swarm came their way, many nations, even those that rank among the strongest militaries in the world, would struggle to withstand it without suffering at least some damage and casualties. Poland knows this. It got a small taste of what Russian drones can do back in September, and it struggled to respond with even a fraction of the efficiency and mastery that Ukraine does, but it's learning from that experience. It's taking clear, confident, and decisive steps to ensure that if Russia's drones cross the border again, they'll be dealt with much more swiftly than they were last time. It's following Ukraine's example, building a complex, layered defense system bit by bit, integrating radars, surveillance systems, early warning, air defenses, interceptors, reconnaissance drones, sensors, and so much more. In doing so, Poland is quickly becoming one of the strongest military forces in Europe and one of the best prepared for war. While others dawdle and hesitate, Poland takes action. It's massively increased defense spending since the war began, ordered world-leading tanks from nations like the US, Germany, and South Korea, invested heavily in additional equipment like artillery systems to bombard any invading enemy forces and fighter jets to patrol its skies, and even put plans in place for a new conscription program that should see all able-bodied Polish men undergo mandatory military training. Thanks to this, its ground and air forces are more formidable than ever before, and its army is set to scale up in the months to come, with increasing numbers of both active duty personnel and trained reservists ready to serve their country should they be required. So not only will Poland soon have an array of new systems in place to spot and shoot down Russian drones, but it will also have an army strong enough not just to withstand an invasion, but destroy any enemy force that dares to threaten its soil or sovereignty. If there's one thing that Russia is supposed to do well, it's intelligence. But as we've discovered with every other aspect of the country's military during the war, Russia's ability to guard its closest secrets is not what we once believed it to be. Leaks keep happening, leaving the country with egg on its face time and time again. You can probably guess where this is going. There's been another leak, and this one reveals far more information about the state of Russian aircraft manufacturing than the country would have ever wanted anybody to learn. The latest intelligence leak has humiliated Russia so badly that it's hard to watch, and it's all thanks to a Ukrainian hacking group called InformNapalm. On November 4th, InformNapalm, which describes itself as a volunteer intelligence community, revealed via its website that it had completed a complex hacking operation against a major Russian company. That operation, which was conducted alongside a cyber analytics center named Phoenix, targeted Russia's Experimental Design Bureau of Motor Engineering, or OKBM. InformNapalm describes OKBM as a company that produces components for Russian aircraft and spacecraft, which offers a hint about what it discovered with its hack. OKBM is a major company that deals with the most sensitive equipment for Russia. It should have some of the best cybersecurity that Russia has to offer. But whatever security it had has ended up being pointless, as InformNapalm has managed to break into OKBM's systems and extract documents that reveal extremely sensitive information. That alone would be enough humiliation for Russia. A failure of security on such a massive scale shows us that Russia isn't doing enough to protect itself from Ukraine's hackers. However, Russia's humiliation is compounded by the fact that the documents that InformNapalm extracted show just how much the military-industrial complex Vladimir Putin has created is starting to creak under the weight of Western sanctions. How do we know? InformNapalm published everything that it found. United 24 Media provides an interesting roundup of the hacking group's main discoveries. It says that InformNapalm managed to get its hands on a host of internal OKBM correspondence related to the development and manufacture of Russia's brand new Su-57 fighter jets, as well as the PAK-DA Poslanik strategic bomber that is being designed to replace much of Russia's aging nuclear bomber fleet. And that's not all. Though we're only just finding out about the success of this hacking operation now, United 24 Media reveals that the documents InformNapalm has made public have been in the hands of Ukraine's defense forces and its allies for months. Putin has been throwing Russia's weight around when it comes to these new aircraft. The collective West has known for a long time that most of what he's saying is a bunch of hot air. Let's start with the PAK-DA. This isn't a secret project in the sense that Russia doesn't want anybody to know that the PAC-DA exists, far from it in fact. We've known about Russia's new bomber since at least November 2024, which is when the national interest first reported on the aircraft. It says that Russia is hoping to rival the best stealth bombers in the American fleet, such as the B-2 Spirit and the B-21 Raider with the PAC-DA. It intends to do so with a plane that can travel at subsonic speeds while maintaining a low enough radar profile that it can reach its targets without having to rely on sheer brute force of supersonic speeds to get there. But the national interest was pointing out problems with the PAC-DA a year before we learned about the new leak. This is easier said than done, the outlet said of Russia's ambition to create a B-2 rivaling bomber. And the Russians do not have a great track record of releasing impressive stealth aircraft. The Russians' only stealth fighter, the Su-57, is understood to have the worst stealth performance of all the stealth fighters. We'll get back to the Su-57 later in the video. For now, it's enough to know that the PAC-DA is supposed to be a game changer for the Russian strategic bomber fleet. Of course, that assumes that the aircraft lives up to the hype. Russia wants to have PAC-DA bombers in mass production by 2027. Now, that seemed like an optimistic timeline, even back in November 2024. It's even more optimistic based on what we've learned from the InformNapalm hack. The group revealed that it has managed to get its hands on technical documentation related to the manufacture of components named either 80RSH-115 or 80RSH of Russia's next-generation bomber. The use of the letters RSH suggests that these components are geared hinges used as part of the hydraulic drive that opens and closes the PAC-DA's bomb bay. So they're pretty important. If the plane bomb bay's doors can't open, the PAC-DA's bombs can't be dropped. OKBM is developing these hinges for the Russian aircraft manufacturer Tupolev in secret, the InformNapalm leak reveals. Specifically, the leaked documents reveal that OKBM's production stages will take place between 2024 and 2027, which lines up perfectly with Russia's proposed 2027 deadline for getting the PAC-DA into mass production. So what's the problem? United 24 Media explains. A state contract between Tupolev and OKBM classifies these details as secret and allows for termination in case of a confidentiality breach, the outlet says. That's precisely what InformNapalm has pulled off. It now knows everything about the hinges that OKBM is building for Tupolev, right down to design documents and photographs that showcase how those hinges work. This was all meant to be top secret, and the exposure of this information is likely the sort of confidentiality breach that could lead Tupolev to cancel its contract with OKBM. If that happens, the OKBM bank balance will suffer. But more worrying for Russia is that Tupolev would have to find another company to design and build the hinges it needs for the PAC-DA. That puts Tupolev in a position where it has to make a tough choice. Does it switch manufacturers, which will lead to delays as the secret parts OKBM was making have to be redesigned? Or does it stick with the OKBM design, knowing that Ukraine and its Western allies now know exactly how the PAC-DA's bomb bays work? Neither choice is especially appealing for Tupolev. As for OKBM, the bad news doesn't end with the possibility that its lucrative contract with Tupolev is now under threat. We mentioned earlier to keep Russia's Su-57 in mind, as we would get back to that supposed fifth-generation fighter. United 24 Media reveals that the leaked documents reveal that OKBM has also been contracted to build a similar part to the one that it's making for the PAC-DA for the Su-57's weapons bays. This part is called the RSH-65, and it's a gearbox joint system that is used within the Su-57's weapons bay actuators. This leak reveals that OKBM is participating in projects under Russian state defense orders, United 24 Media adds. Now, thanks to InformNapalm, the entire world knows the details of the contract for these parts, right down to costing reports that reveal how much Russia is spending to keep the Su-57's weapons bays working as they're supposed to. With that, Russia's humiliation would appear to be complete. Ukraine and its allies now know far too much about two of Russia's most advanced aircraft, including the specifications of key parts and the company that's building those parts. Knowing the company alone is damaging enough because it gives the West an entity to target, as we'll highlight a little later in the video. However, this leak is a literal embarrassment of riches for Ukraine, and just an outright embarrassment for Russia because it reveals something else. Russia is supporting its companies in sanctions evasion. Beyond what InformNapalm has revealed about the PAC-DA and Su-57, the organization's hack has also revealed that OKBM is buying CNC machinery from various countries. These machines include the Hartford HCMC 110AG and the Johnford SL50, which are both made in Taiwan, as well as the Serbian-made Grindex BSD 700U CNC grinder. That alone wouldn't be much of a revelation. A motor engineering company needs to have these types of machines. What is notable is that the leaked documents reveal that OKBM purchased all of these machines using subsidies provided by the Russian Ministry of Industry and Trade. This is state-sponsored sanctions evasion. And it shows us that the Kremlin is willing to pump money into any sort of scheme that allows Russia's companies to get their hands on equipment that indirectly or directly support Putin's war effort. Russia has a complex sanctions evasion setup. Back in June, Sky News reported that Russia maintains a network of subsidiaries and third parties that are helping it to purchase parts and equipment from nations that are refusing to sell to Russia directly. The UK alone has inadvertently provided Russia with radar parts, components, and electronic equipment that are used to make drones and aircraft. Other group of 7 nations have been similarly caught out by Russia's clever network of sanctions evasion, and the InformNapalm leak appears to show that Russia is still getting away with it. That all seems like a big victory for Russia. It may not matter that OKBM has been caught with its pants down because it knows that it's still getting the parts that it needs through its evasion strategies. However, the victory doesn't mean much when you realize that Russia is going to such massive lengths to avoid sanctions for a very specific reason. Its entire aircraft manufacturing sector is still heavily reliant on parts and equipment from countries that are sanctioning Russia. In other words, without these Western parts, the entire industry would collapse, likely taking the Su-57, PAC-DA, and everything else with which OKBM and similar companies are involved. This isn't a future problem. As InformNapalm highlights, Russia's reliance on Western equipment is already coming back to bite them in the behind. The audit highlights an interesting fact. Aircraft construction program deadlines are being missed because of a shortage of machine tool capacity, which arose as a result of global machine tool manufacturers leaving the Russian market, the hacking group says. It goes on to point out that Russia is still managing to get its hands on tools and equipment from Europe and Asia, meaning that much more needs to be done, even though it's clear that sanctions are having an effect. But again, this showcases a severe weak point that Russia has. Without the West, Russia cannot build its aircraft. So we now know that the InformNapalm hack has shown us about Russia's aircraft manufacturing sector and one of its main engineering companies. The question now is, what impact will these leaks have on Russia going forward? That question has already been answered. Earlier in the video, we noted that InformNapalm shared all of this information with the Ukrainian military and Ukraine's allies months before the documents were made available to the public. The European Union, or EU, took notice. As United 24 Media points out, OKBM was included in the EU's 19th round of sanctions against Russia, and it seems that InformNapalm's leak was the reason why. It's thanks to the hacking group that the EU and the rest of the West know how vital OKBM is to several of Russia's most sensitive aircraft manufacturing plants. Cutting that company off at the knees is going to cause serious damage to Russia. The Kremlin may no longer be able to give OKBM subsidies it can use to purchase equipment from countries that don't want to do business with Russia. And with OKBM's operations being so heavily reliant on Western equipment, the loss of access that the EU's latest sanctions package promises could mean that the company can no longer buy the machining equipment it needs to build hinges for bomb bays and whatever else it's manufacturing for Russia's weapons industry. The EU's 19th round of sanctions were officially adopted on October 23rd, and they stretch far beyond the sanctioning of OKBM. The Council of the European Union says that the latest package takes aim at 69 individuals or entities that are known to support Putin's war machine. Belarus has also been hit with sanctions designed to force the nation to limit its support of Russia. Kaja Kallas, who is the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and the chair of the Foreign Affairs Council, explained the sanctions. We have just adopted our 19th package of sanctions. It targets Russian energy, banks, crypto exchanges, and entities in China, among others, Kallas said. The EU is also regulating the movements of Russian diplomats to counter attempts at destabilization. It's becoming increasingly difficult for Putin to finance his war. Every euro we deny Russia is one it cannot spend on war. Kallas rounded off her statement with a threat. The 19th package will not be the last. One has to wonder if this is the only time that a failure in Russian cybersecurity has revealed a company that later went on to fall into the firing line of Western sanctions. It may have happened before, and it may happen again if groups like InformNapalm keep doing what they're doing. Taking a wider view, these new sanctions are set to hurt a Russian aircraft manufacturing industry that is already on its knees. In June, United 24 Media reported that the Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, believes that Russia is struggling to increase warplane production due to Western sanctions. According to ISW, Russia has built or expanded at least 5 structures at its Kazan aviation plant, creating an extra 19,000 square meters of space in the process. Satellite imagery shows that the building work took place between the summer of 2024 and May 2025. Russia chose this facility, the ISW reveals, because it builds several of Russia's strategic bombers and helicopters, There are also plans to further expand Kazan in 2026. However, these types of expansions don't mean much when sanctions are crippling Russia's aircraft manufacturing sector. The enlarged Kazan plant is struggling to keep up with the Kremlin's demands amidst labor shortages that prevent Russia from modernizing or scaling up its aircraft production. This was highlighted in 2024 when Kazan only managed to produce two Tu-160M2 and two Tu-160M bombers. A lack of parts is also causing problems, as the ISW points out. Sanctions and parts and labor shortages will likely continue to slow Russia's aircraft production, even as Russia works to expand physical production capabilities, the ISW says. It's here where the OKBM leak goes from humiliating to effective. That leak has allowed Europe to target a company that is directly involved in the creation of the parts Russia needs to build its aircraft. An industry that's already struggling to produce what Putin requires is only going to find it harder now. Bit by bit, Western sanctions are having an impact. Unfortunately, that impact isn't as pronounced as it should be. One of the key takeaways from the InformNapalm leak is that Russia is still finding ways to circumvent sanctions, as we noted earlier. As important as new sanctions packages may be, especially when they target such critical companies as OKBM, those sanctions are only as effective as the mechanisms used to enforce them. The New Voice of Ukraine makes this point in its report on the OKBM leaks, as it states, "The disclosure raises complex policy questions for Western governments and export control authorities. How to tighten controls on high-precision machine tools, how to detect and block intermediary procurement channels, and how to harmonize secondary sanctions to prevent circumvention." Euractiv adds its voice to the argument in an opinion piece published after the EU implemented its 19th sanctions round. Written by Rasmus Grand Bertelsen, the article makes the point that stronger enforcement is needed on the EU's part to make its latest package, as well as its previous ones, more effective. Uneven implementation and loophole exploitation have hindered past packages, allowing Russia to import billions of dollars of equipment and components that it shouldn't be able to buy. The situation is so bad, Bertelsen says, that around 90% of the foreign components that are found in Russian weapons come from countries that have implemented sanctions against Russia. Sanctions are still working, Bertelsen is quick to point out. Russia's many sanctions skirting techniques, which include the use of shell companies and trading firms in countries like China to buy components third-hand, come at a cost. Russia is spending anywhere between 2 and 5 times as much as it would if it bought these parts directly. So even with the loopholes that Russia exploits, sanctions are still draining money out of the Russian war machine. But Ukraine wants sanctions to go further. Russia shouldn't even have the option to buy in the first place. It's better for Ukraine that the money Russia would spend on critical Western components is instead forced to sit idle or is committed to projects that aren't as effective at strengthening Russia. Bertelsen has suggestions on how the EU can make its sanctions more effective. Creating standardized and EU-wide enforcement protocols is an important first step. The sharing of intelligence and creation of regional enforcement clusters will make it much harder for Russia to get around the EU's sanctions. Closing circumvention routes is also important, and that too will require better coordination than we currently see within the EU. If Russia is then forced to face restrictions on its access to cloud services and other software, along with a lack of tech support on what it does buy, that would mean that it struggles to make the most of any equipment it does manage to buy. These are all nice ideas. Whether the EU and other sanctioning nations can implement them is another question entirely. But right now, the EU tightening its sanctions may be the least of Russia's worries. What will concern the Kremlin more is that the OKBM leak isn't the first in recent memory that has humiliated Russia. Back in August, Ukraine also managed to get its hands on a ton of secret documents related to Russia's newest nuclear submarine, the Knyaz Pozarsky. Those documents revealed the full names and details of the submarine's entire crew, along with the schematics for its weapon systems and combat manuals detailing crew protocols. This is what will really worry Russia. The OKBM leak isn't an isolated incident, but rather the latest leak that reveals to Ukraine the secrets that Russia desperately wants to keep. It seems that everything new that Russia creates is being infiltrated or hacked by Ukraine, suggesting that Russia has some major security issues that it doesn't seem to be able to fix. And even if Russia is somehow able to magically plug its security gaps in short order, it may not matter. Why? Well, the OKBM leak is just the beginning. That's according to United 24 Media, which says that both InformNapalm and Phoenix have stated that the OKBM leaks are just the first installment of a wider series of publications it's going to release that expose the vulnerability of Russian aircraft manufacturing. Whatever action Russia might take now seems to be a case of closing the door after the horse has bolted. The secrets are already in InformNapalm's hands, which means they're also likely in the hands of Ukraine and its partners. All Russia can do now is sit around and wait for Ukraine to reveal what else it knows.
It's meant to be Russia's latest and greatest weapon, a nuclear torpedo submarine that's supposed to give Russia even greater control over the world's waterways by offering an ever-present and hidden threat against Vladimir Putin's enemies. Russia is so confident in its new submarine that it's named the weapons it carries Poseidon, after the Greek god of the sea. But there's a problem with Russia's godlike weapon and the submarine it rides in on. It simply doesn't make any practical sense. Russia's new DOOMSDAY sub is completely useless, making it yet another boondoggle on which Russia has wasted billions of dollars. That's according to United 24 Media, which published a report on November 4 that covered the official unveiling of Russia's brand new Khabar-esque nuclear-powered submarine. That submarine, the outlet says, has been custom designed to carry the Poseidon. It was floated out at the Sevmash shipyard in Severodvinsk just 3 days before the outlet's report, though this doesn't mean that the sub has entered service. Russia is essentially proving to itself and others that the submarine operates as it's supposed to before it attempts to enter mass production. But there was something strange about the launch ceremony. The Khabar-esque, along with the new weapon that it carries, is supposed to enhance Russia's nuclear force projection to a level not yet seen before. And yet Russia revealed surprisingly little of its new submarine during the official launch. The event showcases the submarine's stern, and even that's been enough for several analysts to start ringing alarm bells about the contradictions between what Russia has been telling us about its new weapons and the reality of what they offer. The odds are that Russia's new submarine is completely useless, and in more ways than one. But before getting into that, it's worth taking a look at what Russia wants the world to believe about the Khabar-esque and the Poseidon weapon that it carries. Starting with the submarine, Newsweek provided the basic details in a November 4 article covering what Russia has claimed its new submarine is capable of doing. It quotes the Russian Defense Ministry, which says that the new sub is intended to perform Navy tasks using modern naval underwater weapons, including robotic devices for various purposes. To do that, Russia has reportedly based the Khabar-esque on its existing Bore-class submarines, which supposedly gives the new sub the ability to hide unseen under the ocean waves, ready to strike at a moment's notice. The submarine reportedly has a displacement of around 10,000 tons when it surfaces, and that's powered by a nuclear reactor that should give it unlimited range. Supposedly, it's also equipped with several types of weapons. Beyond the Poseidon, the sub should also pay host to anti-ship cruise missiles and torpedoes, which it can use to engage in combat against other naval assets. Outside of that, data is limited. The submarine is believed to be able to travel at speeds of up to 32 knots and is crewed by 100 people. The sub's mission duration falls somewhere between the 90 and 120-day mark. It's also known that the submarine has been in development for at least a decade, as its keel was laid back in July 2014. It will also have a digital radio communication system, an automatic control system, and a PMU lifting mast device equipped with a surveillance radar, military Russia reveals. However, these scant details don't really seem to reveal a submarine that's much better than those that Russia has in its arsenal. The rest of the project is hidden behind a shroud of secrecy, and it appears that Russia wants to keep it that way. What Russia really wants the rest of the world to fear isn't the submarine itself, but the Poseidon weapons that the sub will carry. And boy, does Putin seem to love the Poseidon. On October 29, Reuters revealed that Putin claims that the Poseidon has been tested. Dubbed a super torpedo by the outlet, the weapon is perhaps more accurately described as a submarine-launched drone that acts like a torpedo, only with a much larger range. Reuters says that analysts suspect that the Poseidon will be able to travel for up to 10,000 kilometers, which equates to around 6,200 miles, and it will do that while traveling at speeds of up to 185 kilometers or 114 miles per hour. Hilariously, Putin waxed lyrical about Russia's new weapon while sharing tea and cakes with several Russian veterans of the Ukraine war in Moscow. For the first time, we managed not only to launch it with a launch engine from a carrier submarine, but also to launch the nuclear power unit on which this device passed a certain amount of time, Putin told the soldiers before adding, "There is nothing like this." The Washington Post revealed a few more details about the new weapon, or at least the details that Russia wants us to know about, in a November 1st piece. The drone torpedo is designed to engage in stealthy underwater travel, much like the sub from which it will be launched. And the Khabar-esque is needed because no other Russian submarine can carry the 70-foot-long Poseidon. Powered by a nuclear reactor and capable of carrying a nuclear warhead, the Washington Post says the Poseidon may have a near limitless range that will allow it to traverse entire oceans before it strikes a target. However, there's also a lot that's still unknown about Poseidon, the outlet notes. Quoting Michael B. Peterson, who is the Center for Naval Analyses Russia Military Studies Program's lead research scientist, the Washington Post states, "There are a few unknowns about the Poseidon, including whether the weapon is preloaded with targeting data and whether it uses satellite communications for guidance," Peterson said. It may also use a wire on the water's surface to receive such information once a target is selected, he said. The same outlet also says that there are rumors of what the Poseidon is supposed to offer as a nuclear weapon. It may not be designed to hit targets on land. Instead, Poseidon may be capable of generating tsunamis that flood Russia's enemies. Putin is happy enough with the weapon that he's even held a ceremony in which he delivered state awards to the developers of Poseidon, CNN reported on November 4. He hailed the weapon, along with another named the Burevestnik, as being of historic significance both for Russia and for the entire 21st century. And though the ceremony may have just been for show, Putin is using it, along with the supposedly successful tests of Poseidon, to try to strike fear into the US. After all, both the Poseidon and Burevestnik have massive ranges. There's only one country that poses a nuclear threat to Russia that Putin might ever intend to hit with these long-range weapons: America. All of this is what Putin wants the world to know, or more accurately, fear about Russia's new submarine and the terrifying nuclear-capable weapon that it carries. The problem is that Putin doesn't exactly have the greatest track record for telling the truth about Russia's military capabilities or the strength of the country's weapons. That's been showcased many times over in Ukraine, as Russia has failed to overcome a country that's far smaller than itself with weapons that, if Russia were to be believed, should have been capable of destroying Ukraine. So, does that mean Russia isn't telling us the full story about the Khabarovsk and the Poseidon? United 24 Media seems to think so, as it reports on a Ukrainian Defense Express article that says that the single snapshot of the Khabarovsk stern might provide some clues to the submarine being far less useful than Putin claims it to be. For one, there are few of the strange design choices Russia has made with its brand new sub. As mentioned earlier, the Khabarovsk appears to be based on the Bore-class ballistic missile submarines that Russia already has in its fleet. Naval analyst H.I. Sutton confirms that, noting that Russia's new submarine likely has a pump jet propulsion system that mimics the one featured in the Bore class. However, the Khabarovsk appears to be much shorter than the Bore-class subs, even though it's been custom designed to fit Poseidon drone torpedoes. At 135 meters, Russia's new submarine is 35 meters, or about 114 feet, shorter than the Bore class. Some reports claim that it's even smaller than that. So what, one might think? A shorter submarine might even be good for Russia, as it makes the Khabarovsk less likely to be detected underwater. While that may or may not be the case, this shorter size is accompanied by Russia's new submarine sitting lower in the water than the one on which it appears to be based. That means it likely has a reduced buoyancy reserve, and that could be a problem for the Khabarovsk. Globe Composite Solutions explains why in an article in which it explains one of the roles that a reserve of buoyancy, or ROB, plays. ROB is vital from a safety aspect, as it allows the submarine to surface and remain afloat. The higher the ROB, the quicker the sub reaches the surface and the longer it stays there once it does. That quick surfacing ability is needed in cases where the submarine is damaged. A hull breach, for instance, could cause flooding that would force the crew to surface. Hitting objects and experiencing explosions do the same. Plus, if the submarine needs to surface for extended periods, such as when breaking through thick ice, the ROB needs to be high to ensure the sub stays at least partially above the waterline. The Khabarovsk, having a smaller ROB than the Bore class of Russian submarines, is a strange choice, because it makes it look like Russia is sacrificing safety. If the Khabarovsk's crew gets caught up in the type of disaster that afflicted the crew of the cursed submarine back in 2000, the sub's lower ROB could possibly mean the difference between life and death for its crew. Now, potential buoyancy issues aside, there's also a rumored aspect of the Khabarovsk that may not be present. Defense Express also reports that the Khabarovsk may actually lack the missile launch silos it would need to fire anti-ship cruise missiles. Again, the size of the submarine comes into play here. It's already been mentioned that the Poseidon is too big to fit in any other Russian sub. It fits in the Khabarovsk, but it's possible that it may do so because the sub sacrifices the space that other, more traditional weapon systems require. At worst, that could mean the Khabarovsk is equipped with Poseidon nuclear-capable weapons and nothing else. That's fine if the submarine is undetected, but what would its crew do if the sub was confronted by another vessel? Firing a nuke at the other vessel seems crazy, especially given the Poseidon's supposed ability to generate tsunamis. If the Khabarovsk is forced to engage an enemy close to the Russian shore, for instance, the Poseidon would do more damage to Russia than it would to an enemy. There are also question marks about whether the Poseidon would even be accurate to hit a small target below the waves. As for vessels above the waves, the Poseidon is an underwater drone. It doesn't appear capable of doing anything against a ship dropping depth charges or anti-submarine missiles. The Khabarovsk needs to be equipped with anti-ship missiles. There's a possibility that it may not be based on Defense Express's report, and that could severely limit its usability for Russia. Still, this pair of design flaws, strange as they may be, isn't enough to make the Khabarovsk completely useless. What may be is that there seems to be no reason for Russia to have built the submarine in the first place. If what Russia claims about the Poseidon is all true, then there's no need for a submarine that's capable of firing the weapon. It has a predicated range that extends anywhere from around 6,000 miles to unlimited, United 24 Media points out. That range is supposed to come courtesy of the miniature nuclear reactors built into the drone torpedoes, and it shouldn't need a submarine to launch the weapon at all. If that were true, United 24 Media says of Poseidon's reputed range, such weapons could be launched directly from shore facilities without the need for an expensive and specialized submarine. Russia could still hit the eastern and western coastlines of the US with its Poseidon, and an unlimited range would put the rest of the world on notice. So why does the Khabarovsk need to exist at all? Well, there are two possible answers to that question. The first is that it doesn't. Mentioned earlier was that the Khabarovsk has been in development since at least 2014. That suggests Russia has started working on the submarine before a weapon like the Poseidon was even considered possible. Putting aside Russia's supposedly lightning-fast development of the Poseidon for a moment, this suggests that the Khabarovsk may have been originally designed for a different purpose altogether, and has only recently been adapted to fit Russia's new weapon. It's almost like Russia poured millions of dollars into a project that seems to offer no advantages over the Bore-class subs it already has, and it's now trying to justify that expenditure. As for the second answer to the question, it may be the Poseidon is far less useful than Russia claims. Defense Express suggests that Russia may need the Khabarovsk, as limited as it appears to be, because the Poseidon's navigation system and supposed range aren't what they're cracked up to be. Either one being worse than Russia claims presents problems that only a submarine can solve. A shorter range would mean that Russia would need a submarine that can get close enough to its target, and almost none of its other subs fit the bill. And if the Poseidon isn't especially accurate, that would mean Russia risks launching a weapon from its shores that could easily go off target and spark a global crisis because it hits a nation Russia didn't intend to hit. Either way, Russia may have a lose-lose situation on its hands. But Poseidon might have another problem then potentially not living up to the billing that Putin has given it. And that problem can be expressed via a question. In what situation would Russia ever use this weapon? A nuclear drone torpedo that can supposedly deliver an apocalyptic scenario to any coast that Russia targets sounds like a massive threat on paper. Russia is using this weapon to signal to the US that there's something that America's existing defense capabilities can't intercept and may not be able to detect, the Lansing Institute wrote in late October. Russia is trying to rewrite the rulebook when it comes to the nature and predictability of nuclear deterrence, but that's an issue in its own right. If what Russia says about Poseidon is true, then it's a technically complex weapon that, as Putin claims, is unlike anything that the world has seen. So how is Russia building it? How many components used in Poseidon are made in Western countries that are sanctioning Russia right now and will surely go harder on those sanctions if Poseidon is revealed to be a real threat? Plus, if Russia is trying to muddy the nuclear doctrine waters, especially when it comes to predictability, it might be creating a rod for its own back. The US might decide that preemptive strikes are on the table when Poseidon is in the water, for instance. And even if a Poseidon launch is successful, what then? A nuclear-capable drone torpedo may devastate American coastlines, but it wouldn't stop the US from responding with its own nukes. What is the point of Poseidon exactly, other than existing as a means for Putin to engage in yet another contest of wills and egos with the US? The odds are that Putin would never dare to use the Poseidon, even if it's everything that Russia's leader says that it is. And if that's the case, that only reinforces the Khabarovsk's uselessness. If all that the submarine carries are Poseidon weapons, then it becomes a target to be taken out as soon as any country detects it. And even a nuclear-powered and nuclear-equipped submarine isn't much use when it appears to have no countermeasures to protect itself against more traditional weapons. And there's another possibility here. The Poseidon itself may be a lie. After all, it's not exactly clear how Russia could be testing a weapon that's supposed to cause nuclear bomb-generated tsunamis without the entire world knowing about it. And, as Dagans reported on November 3rd, the Poseidon project has already been marred by tragedy. The weapon has been in development since 2015, according to some leaked reports. In 2019, the Poseidon was involved in an explosion on board the Losharik submersible that killed 14 of Russia's sailors. Presumably, this was an explosion related to the weapon's propulsion system. But it's still something that suggests that the Poseidon may be nowhere near as close to being ready as Putin claims it to be. Rather than being a real threat, Poseidon may just be another of Russia's propaganda ploys. That's according to the head of Hope for Ukraine, Yuri Boyechko. On November 1st, Boyechko told the Daily Express, "The Poseidon announcement is widely viewed as a propaganda flex aimed at global deterrence and domestic reassurance following new Western sanctions, while military analysis confirms that despite heavy fighting and dangerous infiltration, key Ukrainian supply lines at Pokros remain intact, directly contradicting Moscow's claims of a successful envelopment." So, the Khabarovsk's only weapon may just be a smokescreen, a distraction, a way for Putin to distract the West from the fact that his forces in Ukraine aren't doing what he claims they're doing. Boyechko continues, adding, "The timing of these grand yet unverified pronouncements suggests that the Kremlin is escalating its use of psychological and information warfare to mask the costly realities of the grinding war and preempt international political pressure." So, could that really be the case? If it is, then the Poseidon doesn't really exist, at least in the form that Putin claims it exists. Russia's leader might be making empty threats that are well timed to pull attention away from the Ukraine war. And if Poseidon isn't real, then what's the use of the Khabarovsk? It would just be a submarine that's worse than what Russia has already, and doesn't even have the one weapon that could possibly make it a threat. The combination of Khabarovsk and the Poseidon appears to be yet another attempt by Putin to project a level of power that he simply doesn't have. The same could be said of Russia's recent delivery of weapons to Venezuela. Rather than being a show of force, those deliveries reveal that the empire Putin is attempting to build has crumbled around him, as his puppet regimes are in shambles. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to our trusted channel for more videos covering Russia's latest weapons as well as other major conflicts around the globe.